Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books, out loud. This right here is a little blue book. It happens to be Little Blue Book number 493, and it is titled New Discoveries in Science. And it is written by Hereward Carrington, PhD. Now, there is no copyright date on this book, but according to one of the stories, they mentioned something happening in the future in 1924. So this is Great Discoveries in Science pre-1924. And this is part 5. We left off at the bottom of page 44 in the beginning of a new chapter. And the title of the new chapter is, Has the Secret of Gravitation Been Discovered? Gravitation has always been considered the most mysterious of all forces. It seems to act instantaneously and continually across millions of miles of space, and at the same time holds the atoms of matter together, which are so infinitely small that billions of them could be crowded upon a needle point. No substance has yet been found which is opaque to gravity. One can interpose a screen of some kind which will shut off light or heat or any of the other energies, but no screen has ever been discovered which is opaque to gravity. For example, glass transmits light, but insulates electricity. A sheet of steel is opaque to light, but it's transparent to electricity. But no substance will act as a screen to the pull of gravitation. The exact nature of gravitation has long been the subject of scientific debate. Various theories have been advanced, but objections exist to all of them. Only lately, however, Professor TJJC, government astronomer of Mare Island, California, has advanced the claim that he has discovered the real cause of gravity, and that his theory accounts fully for all known phenomena. There being no objections against it, if true, is indeed a revolutionary discovery of great importance, and Professor C's name will go down in history as one of the greatest scientists of all time. Briefly stated, his theory is that the pull of gravity consists in a particular series of electromagnetic waves, longer than those of light and heat, but closely connected with magnetism. These waves are propagated through space with the speed of light, that is, 186,000 miles a second, which is the greatest speed ever attainable. These waves are radiated in all directions from any given mass of matter, and their strength is proportional to the size of any given body. His theory is that these waves interlace and exert, as it were, a pulling action on each other, in much the same way that two corkscrews interlaced and twisted in opposite directions would pull the handles nearer and nearer together. In this way, the celestial bodies are really pulled or drawn together by the action of these interlacing waves. Professor C also demonstrated before the California's Academy of Science by a series of experiments that the north and south magnetic poles on our Earth are not of the same power. At the equator, the two poles of the Earth's magnetism are equal, but the magnetic poles are of unequal depth in the Earth, the North Pole being 0.76 of the radius downward from Hudson Bay, and the South Pole only 0.66 of the radius downward from King George's Land, near the South Pole. The result is that throughout the southern hemisphere, the magnetic force is considerably stronger than the northern hemisphere of our globe. It remains to be seen whether this theory of gravitation is justified by further experiments. Next chapter, light without heat. It is well known that any light created by man wastes a large percentage of its energy in the production of heat. This is plainly noticeable when in our electric light for the bulb soon becomes hot, when the current is on and light is produced. Nature is far more economical. She has learned to produce light which is practically 100% efficient, so that almost no heat is generated in its production. This is generally known to science as cold light, and is produced by fireflies, glowworms, and certain fish and bacteria, which create this light for themselves whenever they desire. A prolonged study of this cold light has lately been undertaken, with a view to obtaining it artificially, for if its secret could be discovered, it would have great commercial value, inasmuch as a large percentage of the energy expended in producing the light could be saved. Scientists have accordingly undertaken the study of these light-producing creatures, and much has been discovered concerning them. In a paper recently read before the Franklin Institute of Philadelphia, Dr. E. Newton Harvey, professor of physiology at Princeton, stated that the cold light of the firefly is the result of the combination of oxygen in the air and a substance called lumineferin. This substance is produced by certain glands specially constructed by nature for the purpose, known as light organs. They are virtually minute lanterns. They are virtually minute lanterns and are frequently provided with a special lens which focuses the light in the firefly. However, there is no true lens. The photogenetic light-producing cells in the firefly contain a mass of granules, spherical in the male and short rods in the female. Each group of cells is surrounded by a clear ectoplasm containing no granules. Behind this is a layer of special cells which act as reflectors. Air and water are necessary for the production of this light. Much work has been done upon the chemistry of the luminous substances produced by these living organisms. Two distinct kinds of substances have been detected. These are known respectively as luciferase and luciferin, which have quite different properties. The former is unquestionably a protein, and its properties are like those of other albumins, luciferin, on the other hand, is more closely associated with peptones and protozoes. This light produced by living organisms may have a variety of uses, such as warning, to scare away other animals which would otherwise feed on their luminous organisms, or as a sex signal, to bring them together for mating purposes, or merely to be used as lanterns. Many of the deep-sea forms which live in complete darkness have no other light, and it is reasonable to suppose that in their cases, at least, living light is used for purposes of illumination. If the secret of this cold light could be discovered, it would probably save millions of dollars yearly, which is now expanded in useless heat production, for this could be saved and a much smaller amount of energy utilized in the production of light, in which this energy loss would not be present. Next chapter. Shall we find an elixir of life? An elixir of life was one of the things sought for. Oh no. Sorry. An elixir of life was one of the things sought by the medieval alchemist. Throughout the ages, man has sought a means of prolonging life, and he is still searching. One of the largest discoveries of modern biological science holds out to us the hope that life may at least be prolonged for a considerable period and rejuvenated by a process of grafting portions of certain glands which serve to stimulate the activities of the body and, to some extent at least, renew its youth. It has been shown that the rapidity of growth of the body and its aging depend largely upon the vitality of certain ductless glands within it. The secretions of these glands, to a great extent, control the life and death of the body. Professor Voronoff of Paris has succeeded in restoring youth and vigor to several patients by grafting portions of these glands onto the inactive glands in the patient's body. The portions which have thus been grafted seem to restore the whole gland to a renewed life and vigor, and the health and youth of the subject is thereby largely restored. These glands have been taken from the higher apes, which are blood relatives of man. The demand for apes has consequently increased so enormously that an attempt is now to be made to corner the market in apes, and a company has been formed to proceed to Africa, capture a large number of these creatures, and breed them especially for this purpose. Wow. Dr. Voronoff believes that the glands obtained from the apes are better than glands obtained from human beings, since the vitality of the ape is higher and its health is more robust. It is the secretions of these ductless glands, therefore, to which we must look for our elixir of life. At the present time, and there seems no reason to doubt that when such operations become simplified, we shall have here a means of extending life and rejuvenating it in many instances. Boy, I'm glad that one never caught on. It is not known why the human body should die at all, seeing that it is a mechanism which has somehow learned to repair itself. The food we eat is constantly being converted into new tissue, and in this sense it is true that the body of a man of 70 is as young as the body of a baby 6 months old. Both have been newly made from the food eaten, and yet in one case we have an infant, and in the other the body of an old man. Science does not yet know precisely the cause of this, but we are now beginning to suspect that the causes of old age lie in the nature of the secretions of the ductless glands, and particularly the sex glands, and that so long as these are vigorous, youth is maintained, and that when they become deviated, old age and general degradation set in. The importance of these ductless glands, therefore, may readily be seen, and it is possible, in view of this, that in a generation or two we shall have gland mothers instead of grandmothers. Phew. Woo! Alright, new chapter. What are earthquakes? Earthquakes, more than any other phenomena, bring home to us the relative insignificance of man and his helplessness in the presence of any of the titanic activities of nature. The recent earthquakes which have occurred in Japan have brought the subject to the fore, and have set scientists to work afresh on the study of their causation. Broadly speaking, it may be said that earthquakes are caused by relatively slight changes in the Earth's crust. The Earth is continuously shrinking, and as it does so, readjustments of the land and water surfaces of the globe take place. When an earthquake occurs under the ocean, this is less noticeable to us, for the reason that the fluid water rapidly adjusts itself to the changed contour of the ocean bed. But land earthquakes are not only more obviously noticeable to us, but cause vast destruction of lives and property. Certain areas of the land surface of the globe are particularly susceptible to earthquakes. Japan and Central and South America may be mentioned as countries where earthquakes are most frequent. The tremors of earthquakes are transmitted at varying speeds through the Earth's crust, which speeds can be measured by an instrument known as a seismograph. Sometimes these earth tremors are slight and are transmitted across only a superficial and limited area of the Earth's crust. Sometimes they are vast, and are transmitted across practically the whole globe, so that it may be said that in such cases the whole earth trembles. Pardon me. Land earthquakes, which occur near the seashore or in the ocean bed near the coastline, are often the most destructive, being followed by tidal waves of enormous height. During an earthquake in Alaska in 1899, the land swayed and waves rose and fell 80 feet every few minutes. Great destruction was wrought up to 40 feet above sea level. During a great earthquake shock in 1835 on the Chilean coast, the sea retired from the bay, so that sand banks, usually from 40 to 50 feet beneath the surface of the sea, were exposed. Then a monstrous wave returned 30 feet above high water mark and swept all before it. This was followed by a second and third, each exceeding the previous one in power, and it was 3 days before the tremblings of the earth finally came to rest. These shocks were felt 6,000 miles away and caused violent floods upon islands in the mid-Pacific. The whole of the ocean oscillated in its bed. The Carnegie Institute of Washington has recently undertaken the protracted study of the ocean bed along the Chilean coast, with a view to discovering the cause of these earthquakes. The American destroyers, the Hall and the Cory, have been equipped with novel apparatuses, by means of which they will make a complete map of the ocean floor along the western American coasts. This apparatus is based upon the invention of Professor Harry C. Hayes of the Naval Engineering Station at Annapolis. It is based upon the principle of the speed with which sound can be reflected from the ocean bed, so that its depths may be immediately ascertained. In this way, a chart can be made of the bottom of the ocean and possibly earthquake areas readily detected. Next chapter. What is the fourth dimension? The fourth dimension, so-called, has been drawn to the public attention of late by reason of the wide publicity given to Professor Einstein's theory of relativity. What is the fourth dimension? How can it be conceived? The world in which we live is a three-dimensional world. It has length, breadth, and height, combinations of these. Starting at a given point, draw a line. This is one dimension, length. Move this line at right angles to itself on a flat surface and you generate a square, length and breadth. Move this square at right angles to itself and you generate a cube, adding height. Theoretically, it should be possible to move this cube at right angles to itself in some direction and generate a tesseract, or hypersolid. That would be a fourth dimensional figure. Or again, take a point. Two lines can be drawn through this point at right angles to one another on a sheet of paper. But if you want to draw a third line through the point at right angles to the first two, you have to draw it at right angles to the paper itself, as though it were standing up in the air. How can a fourth line be drawn through that point at right angles to the other three? That would be the fourth dimension. Theoretically, a fourth dimension is provable, and a great deal is known concerning fourth dimensional geometrical figures. Dr. Manning has written a whole book on the subject, Geometry of Four Dimensions. But if it is practically impossible for us to conceive the fourth dimension of our minds, can we only arrive at it by analogy? For instance, a right-hand glove cannot be turned into a left-hand glove, but if it is turned inside out, it becomes one. Similarly, it has been proved that a hollow rubber ball can be turned inside out in the fourth dimension without tearing the ball. It is impossible to tie a true knot in a piece of string in two dimensions. On one end has to be lifted over the other into the third dimension, and in our three-dimensional space it is impossible to tie a knot in a piece of string, both ends of which have been held or sealed. But Professor Zollner obtained such knots in the presence of the medium Slade, and this made him believe in the fourth dimension, and caused him, C-O-U-S-E-D, and caused him to write his famous book, Transcendental Physics. Einstein has proposed that time is the fourth dimension, as we know, but this is not a dimension, strictly speaking. This idea has been worked out in some detail. For an original point of view by P.D. Ouspensky in his ingenious book Tertium Organum. It has been contended that clairvoyance is fourth dimensional sight. It is certainly true that by adding another dimension we are enabled to see things which would otherwise be invisible. Thus, if you have a box containing some rings, you cannot see the rings so long as the box is kept on a level with the eyes, that is, in two dimensions. But if you elevate your eyes, or lower the box, and look into it from above, you can see the rings inside. This is by adding another third dimension. You are enabled to see what you could not see before in a closed space. Similarly, it has been contended by adding a fourth dimension, it is possible for clairvoyants to see into what is to us a closed room or closed box, and describe its contents. Of course, this is merely an analogy, which cannot be pressed too far. While the fourth dimension cannot be visualized by the mind, therefore a good deal has been learned concerning it, from the theoretical point of view, and mathematically it can be shown to be possible. Its geometry is also well known. The interested reader may find the subject exhaustively treated in Hinton's book, in the books of Claude Bragdon, and in The Fourth Dimension Simply Explained, issued by Munn and Company of New York. Next chapter. What relativity means. Within the past few years, Professor Einstein has made his theory of relativity famous, but it is probable that the theory itself is not clearly understood by the general public, and the following brief exposition may be of help in this connection. If you give a boy a piece of apple pie, he may consider it a large piece until you give another boy a bigger slice, when he will at once consider his own small. That is to say, it is small relatively to the other piece. Professor Einstein first brought home to us the fact that all motion in our physical universe is not absolute, but relative motion. That is to say, its speed cannot be measured from any stationary point, for there is no stationary point in our world from which to measure it. The earth on which we live is itself moving on its axis, and that axis wobbles, and the earth is also revolving around the sun at a speed of approximately 18 miles a second, and our whole solar system is rushing through space at an unknown speed. If one man is on a moving ship, walking up and down the deck, and he passes another man walking up and down the deck of another boat, moving in another direction, there are all sorts of complicated motions which must be taken into account, and this gives you an idea of the difficulty of obtaining a stationary point from which to make measurements of other motions, that is to say, matter in motion. The first point, therefore, is that all motion is merely relative motion, and Einstein also proved that time on bodies moving at different rates of speed was not the same length of time. That is to say, that an hour on a body moving at very great velocity was not the same length of time as an hour on one moving at a slower rate of speed. Time is, therefore, only relative, just as motion and space are relative. Both depend upon the velocity of the moving body, and both vary as the speed of that body varies. These are two of the simplest conclusions of the theory of relativity. There are, of course, many more complicated theories involved within it, into which we have no time to enter now. The theory itself explains several astronomical phenomena which had been puzzles until the theory was propounded, such as certain major motions of the planet Mercury. The proof of the theory rests largely upon a certain historical experiment conducted some years ago, in which it was proved that a beam of light coming from one of the distant stars was bent or diverted by the pull of gravity exercised upon it by the sun. Very briefly, the experiment was as follows. A photographic chart of the heavens having been made, certain stars were found to occupy certain fixed positions, when the sun was not present in the heavens. When the sun was present, it was, of course, impossible to photograph these stars because the extreme brightness of the sun prevented the stars from being seen by the eye of the camera. When, however, the sun was eclipsed, these stars could be seen, and during the eclipse of the sun, photographs were taken of these same stars, and the plates were compared. It was then found that the position of these stars did not coincide exactly. The stars themselves had not varied relative to the surrounding stars, as subsequent photographs proved. What then had happened? Light rays coming from these stars had been slightly bent to pull inward by the gravitational pull of the sun. This deviation was exactly that required on the Einstein's theory of relativity. Some weird sentence phrasing there. How to boil water containing ice without melting. New chapter. How to boil water containing ice without melting the ice. Impossible, you say? Sure. Many things may seem to you impossible, which are nevertheless facts. Things which are everyday experiences to us were impossible for the last generation. We must be careful before pronouncing that word impossible, for strange as it may seem, this is a simple little experiment which you yourself can perform in a few minutes with a little apparatus procured from Mr. Woolsworth or any drugstore. If you take an ordinary dishpan, fill it with water, and drop a piece of ice in it, the ice will of course melt long before the water comes to a boil. But there is a way of doing this so that the ice does not melt, and the water is boiling nevertheless. Procure, if possible, a Bunsen burner and a few feet of rubber tubing. A Bunsen burner is merely a gas jet with a small hole in the pipe, allowing a certain amount of air to mix with the gas as it burns. In this way, you get a small pointed flame of gas, hot and blue, like the flame seen on a gas stove. Connect the tube to your gas supply and light it. You must have already provided yourself with a glass test tube, about 8 inches long and a half an inch in width. This can be obtained for a few cents. Also a piece of ice about 1 inch long and just large enough to fit into the tube, a couple of leaden shot or small weights, and a handle for holding the test tube. Place the ice in the tube and drop the shot or weight upon it. Then fill it nearly full of ice-cold water. The weights will keep the piece of ice at the bottom of the tube and prevent it from floating to the top of the water. Then hold the test tube by means of the handle over the gas flame at an angle of about 45 degrees, in such a way that the flame strikes the side of the tube about 1 inch below the surface of the water. Do not heat the bottom of the tube containing the ice. It is best to approach the tube to the flame several times slowly to prevent the glass from cracking. If you have carried out these instructions, you will find that the upper layer of the water will be heated and will boil, giving off steam, whereas the lower portion of the test tube is still cold, and you can invert the tube when the solid block of ice will tumble out onto the table. The reason for this is that whereas solids are heated by what is known as conduction, one particle passing on its heat to the next, liquids are heated by convection, circulation of the fluids. In this case, no circulation takes place below the spot where the heat was applied, and hence the lower portion of the tube remains cold. You can see convection going on in any ordinary pan or kettle by dropping a few bits of bran or sawdust into the water. A new test to show the presence of life. New chapter. By an ingenious device, it is now possible to tell whether a plant, a leaf, a seed, or a piece of organic tissue is living or dead. A sure test for the presence of life is very desirable, since it at once informs the experimentalist whether or not the specimen before him can be made to respond and live again, or not. It is possible that this method may be applied to human beings in the future. There are two main tests or signs which all living things show and which are indices of life. One of these is an electrical disturbance. This was discovered more than 100 years ago. The other is the chemical sign, which has only lately been discovered by Professor Shiro Toshihiro of the University of Chicago. In a recently published work upon his researches and discoveries in this field, he says, "It is a matter of very great interest that I have recently found that there is always and everywhere an accompanying chemical change of a particular kind, which is a sure sign of life, and is invariable an accomplishment and as invariable an accomplishment of the vital reaction as the electrical charge. This chemical sign is the sudden outburst of carbon dioxide, which all living things show, plants as well as animals, dry seeds as well as the nerve tissues of the highest mammals. When they are stimulated in any way, the instruments which I have made to detect this carbon dioxide I have called a biometer, because it is an instrument for the measuring or detecting of the amount of life possessed by different things. By means of this instrument, it was shown that nervous breath, that is to say, they take in oxygen and give off, that nerves breathe, It was shown that nerves breathe, that is to say, they take in oxygen and give off carbon dioxide, just as we do. Seeds do the same thing when they are stimulated. Every living thing does so. But the moment every living thing does so. But the moment that things boy, this phrasing is really weird. But the moment that things is dead, no more carbon dioxide is given off. The nervous impulses within the body are closely allied to electricity, but they are also chemical in nature. To a great extent, they're also chemical in nature to a great extent. Taking in oxygen and giving off carbon dioxide is essential for their life. The same sort of thing occurs in the human brain. Accompanying all thought, these transformations take place. Some of these are physical in nature, some vital, and some physical. Physical and psychical. Professor Tahishiro is careful to note this, for the last sentence in his book is, 3 kinds of nervous changes then occur in our brains. When the nerve impulses are passing, an electrical charge, a chemical change, and a physical change, which is the fundamental change. That which makes up our mental life is the psychical change, the thought itself. For us, this is the greatest reality. Boy, that was really written weird. Okay, looks like maybe the final chapter. Your aura, and what is it? Surrounding everybody, there is said to be an atmosphere or aura, which is radiated from it some distance into space. This is most noticeable about the head and is said to be the halo or nimbus, which was portrayed by the old masters above the head of Christ and other holy personages. Baron Reichenbach made a study of this subject about the middle of the last century and published an extensive work upon it. His views received no credence, however, and it remained for Dr. Kilner of St. Thomas Hospital, London, to prove scientifically that such an aura exists surrounding every human being. He perfected a series of slides or screens by means of which this aura can be seen by nearly everybody. A coal tar product known as dicyanin renders the eyes of an onlooker susceptible to vibrations not ordinarily perceived. When the subject is viewed through these slides, the aura may be distinctly seen surrounding the nude body of the subject, who must be placed against a black background in a semi-darkened room. This misty atmosphere was shown to consist of 3 layers. First, there is a dark outline just touching the surface of the body, which is called the earthic double, extending 2 or 3 inches into space. Beyond this is a relatively dense layer known as the inner aura. Beyond this, again, is a more tenuous layer known as the outer aura. This aura extends further in the case of women than in the case of men, and is modified by the physical, mental, and emotional state of subject at the moment. The color and shape of the aura is changed immediately over any diseased spot in the body, and because of this fact, it has been found possible to use the aura as a means of diagnosis. Wonder why they don't do that today. The precise nature of this human atmosphere is as yet unknown, but Dr. Kilner believes that it is an ultraviolet phenomenon. While it has been seen by many persons, it has not as yet been photographed, but a number of experiments in this direction are being undertaken in the laboratory of the American Psychical Institute of New York. There is no aura about dead bodies. The greater the degree of vitality, the further goes this aura extent from the body, showing that it is more or less directly dependent upon life. Experiments have shown also that both poles of the magnet will attract the aura, showing that it has no polarity. When the body of the subject is charged with static electricity, the aura slowly vanishes, but after the current has been turned off, it will enlarge to a greater size than before. True radiations of the aura will discharge an electroscope without physical contact. The vapor of certain chemicals, such as bromine and chlorine, cause the aura to recede, and it is also modified by the thought, will, and emotion of the subject. The scientific study of the aura is one of the fascinating fields open to our future scientists. No, it's not. And final chapter. The French Revolutionary Calendar. At the crisis of the Great Revolution, the French nation, so gifted alike in scientific and artistic talents, determined to make their system of time, length, breadth, weight, etc., a decimal system, so that it would be strictly accurate, in accordance with certain rules, and at the same time as simple as possible. A new calendar was made. The Christian era was wiped out, and was replaced by the new French era, dating September 22nd, 1792. Instead of our week of 7 days, a week of 10 days was established, the 10th day being set apart for rest, like the Sunday. Instead of the mythological names of the month, others deduced them from prevailing seasons of the year were substituted. Everything was to be reduced to the basis of reason, which was defined. The Notre Dame was converted into a temple of reason. Memore, the young and beautiful wife of a Jacobin printer, was chosen to represent reason. She was dressed in white, with a mantle of azure blue hanging from her shoulders. Her hair was crowned with a cup of liberty. Adorned in this way, and seated upon a chair decorated with ivy, she was borne amid the shouts of the people to the Notre Dame by 4 citizens. It was decreed that the following table should be adopted and held to be official thought. France. Autumn. Vintage month, September 22nd to October 21st. Foggy month, October 22nd to November 20th. Sleety month, November 21st to December 20th. Winter would be snowy month, December 21st to the January 19th. Boy, that's really dumb. While such a system doubtless had much to commend it, it speedily fell into neglect when the new order of things was restored in France, and even came in for its share of ridicule. The late George Gates, for example, characterized the method by the following ludicrous verse: autumn, wheezy, sneezy, freezy; winter, slippy, drippy, nippy; spring, showery, flowery, bowery; and summer, hoppy, croppy, poppy. And here I'll show you what I was looking at when I just skipped over things. See, it's just a hodgepodge of this. And that, my friends, is the end of book number 493, New Discoveries in Science, written by Hereward Carrington, PhD. And this is pre-1924 science, so not 2020. Thanks for listening.